Right, good morning, everyone who is joining. Good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, wherever you may be. As everybody is joining us this morning, right, hoping that people get to not just know some new sites and some new information today, but that you all get to know some new people too. So please turn on your video chats, meet some new folks if you can, and also introduce yourself in the chat box. Right? So please, please, please introduce yourself in the chat box. That's how we know who else is here, who we can talk to, and who we can work with going forward. So let folks know your name, where you are, where you're coming from, maybe why you're thinking about this particular topic today, how it's resonating with you. And we're going to give folks just another moment to be jumping on the call too. Thank you all for being so prompt though. But it should be there down in the right-hand corner. Use that chat box and say hello. And then we'll get going in just a few moments. Super excited to see friends that we know already. Kristen and Elon and Carolina, people logging on from all over. It's wonderful to have you here. Some folks who I have not met yet. Really happy to have you. Priyanka from the Partition Museum, who was on a webinar with us earlier this week. If you haven't ever thought about the partition between India and Pakistan, that is a story. That is a museum that tells that story. Check out their work. Did a webinar with them on Wednesday that's up. If you want to learn more about them, hear from some of their staff, that's awesome. Thinking about bringing people together, telling stories in the face of big systemic challenges. That's a place that does a lot of that. Yeah, thanks to everybody who's writing in. Excellent. Excellent. Great group of folks joining. We're going to give everybody just one more moment to come in. And then we're going to get going. Great. We've got folks coming on Canada, a couple folks from Montreal. Nice. Eastern State Penitentiary. Love seeing you all, right? We've got academic folks, we've got practitioner folks. Excellent, excellent. This is good. We're bringing a good set of perspectives to this today. All right. All right. Well, as I said, good morning, good middle of the night, good afternoon. It's morning where I am right now in Vermont on the East Coast of the US. We're so glad that you all were able to join us today to do a little bit of conversation and talking. And we're going to hear from a couple sites, and then we're going to jump into some big conversation. Just as we start, we want to call out that we are really thinking about every day all the folks around the world right now who are protesting the global systems of race and colonialism and capitalism that are structuring the lives that we are all engaging with, whether it's here in Europe and Africa and South America and Asia, right, that we're all engaged with. And so our thoughts and efforts and support and care are with those folks. We hope that some of you are those folks, we are those folks. But we are thinking about them and hope that this next hour is just one more tool and resource for you as you think about how to support the kind of change that people are working for and calling for right now. A couple technical things that make these work a little bit better. Right, information helps us grow and learn and do things new and better. Social change and social movements work with relationships. They are powered by them. Change is based on the relationships that we build in the world. To that end, right, again, please use the chat box throughout to talk, learn, connect with each other. If you can turn on your video camera, we encourage you to do so. It's part of making human connections at a moment when we are often physically distant from each other in the world. And that throughout that we are gonna move back and forth between a little bit of a couple of our speakers talking and then some small group work and then some large group conversation too. Anytime you are in conversation with others, whether it's in the chat box, the small group work, the large group work, we encourage you to treat each other with care, right? It's an important thing always, but it's a moment in our world right now where showing care for each other is an important thing. We are gonna record this. We are recording it. Thankfully, my colleague remembered to push record because I never remembered to. Just it's part of the way that we can share this with other members and folks around the world as we are going through. Just a note up top that we started this webinar, gosh, I think we started talking about it sometime in late 2019, maybe earlier. As the world turns, things take a little bit of time to happen. So our thinking on it has evolved. We've got two great folks bringing two really different perspectives that interlock in nice ways though. And so we sort of are pushing ahead with this because while we recognize that the world is having a very particular conversation at the moment, we think this question about how we share our historic sites, what those events are, how we think about some of these places is actually really relevant to what's happening right now and is just another entry point into the larger conversation. So happy to do that. So looking forward to having the conversation. So the way this is going to go, we're going to hear from Sean, we're going to hear from Henryka, and then we're going to break into some small groups and let folks connect with each other. So with that, I think Sean, you want to take it from there?
Sure. Thank you so much, Braden. My name's Sean Halifax. I'm with Charleston County Parks and Recreation Commission in Charleston, South Carolina. So it's morning here. And so thank you, Braden, for inviting me. And I think I'm the reason why this is isn't as occurring as late as it is. I got a little sick earlier this year and had to take a time out. So I appreciate the coalition being so patient with me in my recovery. But I'm really excited to be here today and to speak with everybody. And I'm so happy that so many people have been able to join us. The site where I work is called McLeod Plantation Historic Site. It's relatively new. It opened in 2015 by an agency who really didn't have a whole lot of experience working with historic sites. We had one previous foray into this, and that was when we opened up a nature preserve in 2000. It's called Kaw Interpretive Center, and it wasn't until about 3 years later that we became aware that it was one of the sites associated with the largest uprising of enslaved people in British colonial America in 1739, the Stono Slave Rebellion. So that was our first experience, and it was a nature preserve. And this site, you can see on the slides some images, both historic images and some more modern images of this site. Has about 13 historic structures on 37 acres. And all of those historic structures are located within about a 2-acre space. So it's very concentrated. And when we opened, our interpretation department for the agency had a philosophy regarding activities at the site that were non-educational activities that they should at a minimum relate to the site's themes. But that wasn't necessarily the case for the entire agency that I work for. As I mentioned, it's a Parks and Recreation agency. We recognized at the time, as we were opening it, there was a somber place with a tragic history, and that for some of our guests, this was going to be a sacred place. Here in Charleston, Plantations, in fact, the longest, the plantation that's been open the longest in the United States is here in Charleston, opened within 5 years of the American Civil War to the public. And here, having events and weddings and things like that was just commonplace, and it was a way to provide supportive revenue. And when our site was coming online, the Planning Advisory Committee agreed that events and weddings would be able to occur here. Even some African Americans on the site, on the committee, supported this idea, and after having conversations with them, the reason they supported this was because they saw it as a compromise for us to be able to talk about the things that we had planned to talk about. We're one of two sites in the United States that are plantation museums whose focus is and purpose is to preserve and share the stories of enslaved people and their descendants. So it was a bit of a compromise, but what we didn't understand at the time was that this would create a dissonance not only for our staff, but also for our visitors. And didn't understand just how deeply that would impact us. And then less than 2 months after opening, Dylan Roof visited the site. The picture that you see scrolling through is of him on our opening day. And when he visited the site 2 months before killing 9 people at Mother Emanuel AME Church, it changed our approach to this site, and it changed our understanding of this site and its placement within historic context. And so our period of significance, interpretive significance, went from 1990 to 2015 in the present. And that changed everything. It altered how we thought about this site and the kinds of activities that should be here, at least with our interpretation team. And it became what we learned is that this is something that required internal education within our agency. And so over time, we began to place restrictions on weddings and special events that occurred at the site. And over time, just more and more restrictions were placed until in the spring of 2019, we became a member of the coalition. And following our joining the coalition, the agency decided that no longer would weddings be allowed at the site, but events would be. And those events now are removed from what is perceived to be the historic landscape. And that's where we stand now. However, any weddings that were already on the books and events that were already on the books, we kept those contracts in place. In fact, there's a wedding out there this afternoon, today, starting at 4 o'clock. So we're still in the process of evolving and changing at the site and having a better idea of what sites are appropriate. I think the people that work on site understand those things, but I'm not sure that everyone within our agency does. And so it's an educational process. And I think probably where we are now is we see this site not just as a place where tragic history occurred and that it's a somber place, but we now see this place as a place of conscience, a place of memory, and a place of potential healing. And we see this as a place to continue to educate not just our visitors, but also our fellow employees and colleagues within the park system.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Right, just a little introduction to kind of what's happening there at McLeod, and then right, some of the thought process that's evolving there. We are going to cycle back. I'm sure there's many more questions that people have for you, but we kind of want to bring in another perspective to think about this right now. Right, and Henryka, would you tell us a little bit about your site in Nuremberg and how you think about activity at that site?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much, and I'm happy that I can join this meeting, and because basically it's the memoriam is the first. Last year became the first. I think it was last year became the first German member of the coalition. So surprisingly, to be honest, I never expected that there wouldn't be any other German members so far. But of course, I'm glad that we were able to join the coalition since last year. So yeah, well, the memoriam is a site that is, well, as you can see on the photograph, we are. It's the courtroom, the site around, or it is the site of the courtroom where between 1945 and 1949 the trials against the highest representatives of the Nazi regime were held. the site, the museum or the exhibition of the memoriam, the institution, was opened only in 2010, which sometimes surprises a lot of people because it seems to be very late, just 65 years after the beginning of the trials. The reason is that this used to be until March this year, so just brand new development. Until March this year, this used to be an active courtroom. So we opened the memoriam in 2010, and we shared the courtroom, so to speak, the site, so to speak, with the court, with the active court, because it's located in the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, and the Palace of Justice has the local court, the regional court, the high regional courts there. So it's a lot of justice activity, so to speak. And well, it is, unfortunately, we were able to find an agreement with the court that since this year we can use the courtroom just as a public site, so to speak. Additionally, we have our exhibition in the courtroom upstairs. The photograph you see here is is a photograph from our exhibition. We have, so our site is mainly in the, or used to be for about 10 years, mainly in the context of between an active courthouse and a site of remembrance. So that was always what we had to deal with. The other thing is that we are dealing with a very specific perception of visitors coming to our place. We have almost like 80% of our visitors coming from abroad. So we have a very international audience, a lot of them from the US. And the perception of our site in general is that this is a site of Nazi history, which isn't wrong, isn't completely wrong, but on the other hand, it's not really true, because it is not about the Nazi history itself, but it is about how we dealt with that past and how we coming to terms with that past. So basically, our story starts in 1945, and it's not the years before 1945. So that is one of the perceptions. The other perception is that we are a site of Holocaust remembrance. Again, we aren't, because the Nuremberg trials, frankly speaking, weren't really Holocaust trials, even though the expectation is there that there were the first Holocaust trials in the world. But in detail, looking to that from a legal perspective, there weren't really. So we are dealing with these perceptions. We belong to the city of Nuremberg. We are a municipal institution. Our agency is the Department of Cultural Affairs of the city of Nuremberg. And we are in a network, part of this network of the municipal museums, including the Toy Museum, a Museum of Industrial History, etc. So we are in a network that maybe a little bit, as Sean already explained, where the general attitude is not that one of a memorial site or a site of remembrance, and rather, well, again, a little bit like this expectation or these ideas of sites or museums that are mainly like fun places, rather. So that is sometimes a little bit challenging for us. In regards to the actual topic or title of this webinar today, I mean, we don't get requests for weddings because, I mean, if you look to the courtroom and if you look to this picture here, you see the defendants, the two of the benches that originally stood in the dock. So I'm sure there's no one who would like to get married in front of Goering and Hess and Streicher, etc. So I don't think so. Something we are dealing with is rather, we get a lot of requests about events that are dealing with, in a broader perspective, dealing with history, dealing with law, the rule of law, etc. And a lot of requests dealing with Nazi history. So people want to hold their events at our place because they consider it as some sort of an upgrade, probably, with an attractive location. So that's basically something we are really dealing with, and we have a very strong policy from our house, from our institution ourselves, a very strong policy as I said, we are not a place of about telling the story of Nazi history itself. So, and that's also a policy we are strongly committed to, that we don't allow any kind of events at our site that are like, I mean, for example, you wouldn't have an event at our place dealing with the beginning of the Nazi regime or something. So as long as it's not the specific aspect of how to deal with that past, how to come to terms with that, legal prosecution, etc., social discussions about this, about coming to terms with this past. As long these aspects are not part of the events, we simply don't let them in. So we have a quite strong policy about that. Maybe I should add, just as a remark, also that we do have in Nuremberg another really important site on Nazi history, which is the Documentation Center Nazi Party Rally Grounds, which is located on the former rally grounds, still existing in Nuremberg, a huge area. With a lot of also outside open air area where people just can walk in and have a look, and there they have a lot of cultural events, car races, etc. on that area. But so Nuremberg definitely is, this history of Nuremberg is strongly linked to the Nazi era. And so we basically in Nuremberg have two sides dealing with that. So one really dealing with the past, with the Nazi period itself. And then we have the memoriam, which is dealing with coming to terms with that. So that's also probably a reason why, or not probably, it is a reason why we can so strongly commit to this policy of saying, okay, events, anything happening in our place has to have a very strong link to exactly what happened at this historic site. So I don't know. I didn't look to the. I didn't have a look to the watch, so I don't know whether whether I should continue or just
wonderful.
Have a break now.
That's great. Maybe just a few things that we could talk about, just hear from the two of you before we kind of jump into some small groups with people. One of the interesting things that came out when we were having some of our chats before, right, that public events and these kind of special events that we allow are really important moments for an institution, because they are the moments that we're sharing power, right? And we're offering our sites as platforms, and we are giving control to others about sort of what is happening there. And so it's this power sharing moment, and what do we choose to share power for, and to what ends, and how open is that going to be? I think that's probably something that's going to come up a couple ways in discussions as we go through, but I wondered if we might start with just one of the places that there was a difference was about the idea of speech, and what speech you feel comfortable controlling and allowing at your sites, and which you don't, and kind of where the social context that comes out of. And I wonder if you might both speak to that. Henryka, do you want to speak to kind of what your understandings of speech in Nuremberg?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, of course. I mean, it's of course a general. I think a general aspect or a question we are all dealing with. In regards to what you just mentioned about power, that it is who has the power to give the definition of the site, and to say, okay, what is this site basically standing for, what is it symbolizing, etc. And in regards to Nuremberg, to the courtroom, we have a very strong symbolic site. So I mean, this is if you think of the picture of the defendants in the dock in Nuremberg, this is one of the strongest iconic photographs about the victory over the Nazi regime, I would say. So in regards to speech, it is what we recognize at our side is we do have it's a lot about what I said earlier, the perception or the expectation that this is a site about Nazi history. we get a lot of visitors who are not a lot, but we sometimes get visitors who tend to make a little bit fun out of it, in a sense of they, you know, if we would allow them, they would sit in the dock, take selfies in the dock. They would. We had something we were talking about earlier, is that this week when we prepared this meeting, that we, for example, last year had a case of a guy showing a Hitler salute in front of our door entrance. So in general, what we are sometimes dealing with is, in Germany we have a very strict law about about what you say, what you show, anything showing symbols, etc., that might be anti-constitutional symbols, like the Nazi salute, like swastika, etc. That's all strongly, strictly forbidden. And it's a it's a crime if you do so. And so we sometimes have the situation that we simply have to call the police, very simply, because that's what people, because there is no doubt about whether we do not even have to ban these people from our area, from our side, because it's something, in the end, something the police does, because they would take the people. So that is something that's sometimes happening. In regards to speech, as I understand your question, maybe I'm understanding it wrong, it's definitely a challenge at our work, and I think we will come to this aspect of current politics afterwards later. But a challenge we have in our work is, on a daily basis, where to find where to have the definition of what is allowed to be said at our side and what isn't. So if someone shows the Hitler salute or the Nazi salute, then it's an easy case for us, so it's just a criminal thing. If it is something, people saying something, and for example, you're not allowed to deny the Holocaust in Germany. It's simply, again, it's a criminal thing. So, but what if you have people who, you know, slightly start to discuss these aspects and want to, and you already get the feeling in which direction this discussion is going, but you don't really get the chance to, you know, you don't really get them in a sense of officially they're not saying anything. So, and that's a huge challenge for us, also for our educational staff.
Yeah, thank you. Sean, anything you would add about sort of speech at McLeod?
Yeah, so you brought up a couple of things. I don't think I have enough time to get into all of the things that you kind of brought up, Braden, but it's a really good question. And there's two things. I see this in kind of two different ways. One is talking about events and access to events and who has access to events, and those events being forms of speech. And working and living in a system and in a culture such as we do, we have, perhaps intentional, perhaps not intentional, have placed limitations on how people may exercise their rights to free speech at our site, by making sure that all of our events are fee-based, so therefore automatically it limits access to that site. So thinking of speech through events and programs, and there's definitely some limitations that are there. But as far as self-expression, there are really no limitations on self-expression at our site that I'm aware of. It's not one that our agency has really done a lot of thinking or talking about that I'm aware of. However, I think that maybe there has been some discussions about the possibility of establishing free speech zones at some of our parks in the event that there would be some kind of demonstration or protest. But really, when I heard Henryka talk about, you know, the limitations on just an action of the Hitler salute or the Nazi salute, that definitely took me by surprise, because that's something that, you know, we would, at our site, we might raise our eyebrows at it, and we might take really close notice of that person on our site as they maneuver through the site. But I don't know that we would be in a position to remove them from the site, and certainly not call the police. So it's an interesting question, and I don't think it's one that our organization has fully explored.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for both of those points, right? The one about the way that the structures and the financial structures of the way we set up special events has an unintended consequence of limiting speech, right? In terms of who has the resources to be able to do that, right? And is
But it
thinking
could be intended as well.
say that again. Say
It
that again.
could be intended as well.
Or it could be intended. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. And then the other side of that being, right, that there are different ways that people think about what's allowed at a place like this and what's not. I want to take a moment, like there's a lot more to jump into how you're thinking about events right now. But I want to take this moment to kind of get us into some small groups for a little bit. There's so much thought and experience and kind of pressing issues on the call right now with everybody else. We're going to go into small groups of 3 to 4. Chat for, give you maybe 5-6 minutes for you to talk with everybody else, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about how you're seeing this matter where you are, and then we'll come back together as a big group. So you all watch me do some public math right now as I try and figure out how many people in which groups, and we'll take it from there. What are some of the big ideas that came up in your groups that you want to maybe talk about with share with everybody else? And this is a moment where it's hard in digital spaces because we can't like read each other's body language and see, oh, that person's about to talk or this or that. So just go ahead, be brave. We'll sort it out. You're not rude. What are some of the ideas you wanna talk about with this whole group?
Okay, I'm going to jump in because nobody else did yet. So very quickly, I run a plantation house I'm in a historic house that was a plantation and then became the site of a free colony in 1848. So we had sort of tragic history and celebratory history all mixed in together. We do a lot of programming with groups of color and every gender, and we have a huge wedding program. And we have African Americans who get married at our site and everybody else as well. And I guess I struggle, obviously we have a sensitive history, but we have over the last 5 years, through the National Trust, we want to be open to everyone. We want every couple to feel that they could get married at our property. So I'm struggling a little bit with the newer idea of potentially shutting down the wedding program. I'm hesitant about going back to a place where only a particular person would get married at our property, or a particular couple. And to me, that's going backwards rather than forwards. I want everyone to feel comfortable where we are. And so that's my struggle. And I would love to hear other opinions about that.
How else are people thinking about programming at their site? What are some of the pieces you're struggling with this? What's challenging you? Right? I appreciate Amanda saying, hey, I'm in process on this. I'm trying to understand new things. I'm challenged by this. What else is challenging people? What else are you thinking through? Suzanne.
I'll mention something, which is that as we're wanting to look at the history of the 60s and 70s, I've found that the scars of the Vietnam War and the different roles that people played are still very, very fresh for people. And similar, I mentioned in our group, the other thing that I have is because we are the historical society for a specific city, people think of it very much as being a valedictory place, especially for a city that is struggling currently economically. And so it's very challenging to bring up anything else. I will say I had a show on law and the courts system where I was thinking of having a section about crime, but yet the spike in gang crimes and things is so recent that I decided that it was just too early to be able to have this without the public freaking out about it, and that we were just establishing ourselves as a very public institution. So I sort of pushed some of these tougher things back until we've established the dialogue and our role a little bit more thoroughly.
So two big ideas there, right? One about when is it really helpful for us as institutions to kind of dive into the present conversation, and when is that challenging to you? And that other one that you brought up about kind of nostalgia and pride, right? And we know that nostalgia and pride can be important parts of how people make it through, form identity and make it through hard times. They can also be really destructive when they turn into forms of nostalgia and pride that become harmful and exclusionary and domineering, and become about expressions of power. So right, that's a whole nother deep conversation to dive into as well. So thank you for calling that out, because that's a part of navigating these sites, right? And public programming is about kind of ends up pulling on all of these threads, these special events. Molly, I see you had your hand up.
Hi, everyone. I'm from Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site in Philadelphia, and one of the things that came up in topic in our breakout room was the idea of balancing your organization's mission with your budget. I brought up with our small group that Eastern State makes a good amount of its daily revenue every year from a haunted attraction that we use as a fundraiser each year. And that is something that doesn't necessarily go with our mission that we adopted in 2017, which focuses on criminal justice reform and issues of mass incarceration. However, the way that we like to think about it is, we're using the profit that we make from the annual haunted attraction fundraiser as a way to fund what we feel is the important work that we do, 365. So we're using something that, doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with our mission anymore, but it's still an important tool for how we interpret the history of our building and how we make sure that our voice is still heard in this conversation about criminal justice reform today.
There's a note from Francine about that. Oh, go ahead, somebody. So was somebody about to jump in there?
Oh, sorry, that was me.
Go ahead, Holly.
I keep forgetting to turn my mic on. I work at Montpelier Historic Site in Laurel, Maryland, and we are the former plantation site of one of the biggest enslavers in Maryland. So back in the 70s, a lot of Maryland sites and sites around the country were being saved in honor of the bicentennial. And in Maryland, a lot of those sites had a lot of acreage. So we have 70 acres. It was originally a 9,000 acre property. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because what was built around the grounds are many, many apartment buildings. So green space is in short supply. So I guess my concern is how to make our grounds available for people to enjoy and play, and not necessarily weddings. That's not so much my concern, but just to enjoy it and play it there, but also be aware of the tragic history that happened there. And I was wondering if people had thoughts on how to designate areas that are private and sacred for memorializing and reflecting and grieving, and also have other areas that are free for people to enjoy and run around and have picnics, because it's needed. And the irony is that it was saved because it was a plantation, and now it's one of the only green places, in the area. So
I think that's a really important thing to say. I would mention, I don't think anybody from Dix Park is on the call today, but they are thinking through that in North Carolina too. Right? What happens when two parts of our problematic historical legacies come into conflict, the ways of seemingly the ways we want to address them, right? So who's able to have healthy living communities, right? And we know green spaces are a part of that. And right, a set of legacies comes down to us, which restricts who has access to those spaces. And then on the other hand, right, there is ongoing racial violence in America, right, and the histories and legacies of racism that shape the world. And we need to address and correct that too, right? So, right, what do we do when those things come into contact with each other?
What was the name of the place you said we're
Dick's
looking
Park
at?
is wrestling with that. I don't think
Is
they
it-
have answers. DIX, Dorothea Dick's Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think they have answers, but I think they do have a lot of questions, and that's a great place to be.
Thank you.
I know that the funding question is one that often comes up around this. Sean, do you have a 30 seconds on how you're planning on taking this on? Because I know you're all still new in this, so you don't have answers, but how are you planning on taking this on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so one of the things in the process of working internally within our organization is the question then goes, okay, so how do we replace the revenue that's going to be lost? In my group, we were talking about this, and about 50% of our agency's budget comes from taxes, and about 50% of our budget comes from revenue raised by our facilities. Our site at McLeod has a relatively small budget compared to the overall budget of our agency. And we just became associated with our foundation, nonprofit foundation. And the challenge to the foundation is for them to work to raise money to replace the lost revenue. But I recognize that we're in a very different position than a lot of other organizations in that, we're part of a much larger organization that has tax money coming in to support it. At our site, weddings and events, all weddings and events were projected to make up about 18% of our revenue. And so with the budget that we have, that's a relatively small amount for a fundraiser to be able to recapture. So we sit in a pretty good position. I've worked at other sites though, where that would be a much bigger challenge, especially if the site is a nonprofit site. So the revenue question is one that's really, that's an important one, and it's a difficult one. And I think that when we first started, that's where people that were on our advisory committee were willing to make the compromise to say, we'll stomach this because we believe in the message that's going to be shared at the site. And I wanted to say real quickly to Holly, a lot of this has to do with how you market a site. And well-being and self-care and all of those things are important components at places where sometimes tragic histories have occurred. And if there's a way to take that into consideration when you think about how these sites are utilized by different visitor groups.
And I would think about some of the work that's happened at other coalition members over the years where years ago at Perm 36, right, survivors would hold art festivals there and music festivals because that was part of demonstrating how they were now free. An important part of that, right, is who was making those choices, right? And it was formerly incarcerated people who now had power and control in those sites and were able to make the decisions about how they best wanted to represent that for themselves and for their communities, right? So I think there's a number of examples around the world of where people have made that happen, but it involves a lot of other pieces of work to support that happening in good ways. Sean and Henryka, as we come to the end here, do you have any brief thoughts about how the current politics of the world, current events are pushing or shaping or changing the way you're thinking about your sites right now and how people use them? Henryka, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think our answers to this question will probably currently just will be different. It's something that is really challenging us is that we are the Nuremberg trials are considered the beginning of international criminal law. So that's what our institution, what a strong aspect of our story is. A challenge is in regards to the contemporary perspective is we are discussing a lot of current politics with our visitors, but strong mainly in the focus of international criminal law. So for example, we have a lot of debate about, so how was it possible that in Nuremberg the representatives of the regime, of the Nazi regime, could be were held accountable, and how is it, why does that not happen in Syria, for example? So we are discussing a lot of international politics at our place, and our challenge is, we have a section about that in our exhibition. So our exhibition is dealing with that, with these contemporary perspectives and challenges. But of course, our problem is, I mean, we can explain the existing system of international criminal justice today, but of course we cannot solve the problem. And if there are political challenges and political tasks, it's nothing we can solve. But it's so that is really really challenging us, and that also is something where we always get the feedback from our guides who are giving the tours and who do the programming, etc., that they get involved in a lot of political discussion. So that's one aspect. The other aspect we are dealing with is neo-Nazism in Germany. So whether it's a big debate currently in Germany whether the state fails in dealing with neo-Nazis. We had in the past year several cases of neo-Nazi attacks. Just this week we had the first anniversary of the killing of a politician by a neo-Nazi suspectedly. So it's that's another thing. So how is not only about how neo-Nazism is raising again in Germany, but it's rather in our context, in the context of our site, it's rather how can German politics and how can law react on these events or these things happening. So just maybe as a brief answer.
You know, right, this is a conversation that can go on for months and years as we pull this all apart. Yeah. Sean?
Yeah, quickly. The way things are right now at this moment, as we speak, it's a real recommitment to the work that we're doing. You know, we really see that our goal, our purpose to help people understand this unbroken line that goes from the institution of slavery through Jim Crow, through lynchings of the 20th century, through the civil rights movement, I mean, through mass incarceration, all of these things, it's an unbroken line. And to help people be able to understand that we find ourselves today where we are at this very moment is directly related back to where we have been in the past. And that a site like McLeod Plantation Historic Site is ground zero for this kind of white supremacy, racism, and this is where it starts in America. And so we're recommitted to that goal. I have one concern about this, and that is that the folks that work at my site and myself particularly, is my own personal emotions and passions and feelings, creating a space that is no longer open or perceived as not welcoming to everyone. It's a personal challenge, and I think it's a personal challenge for anyone working at a site similar to mine or anyone that's dealing with questions that we're facing today. I think that I have to keep in the front of my mind every day that this is a place where learning needs to occur. There has to be room for people to have cognitive dissonance, for people to work through all of this. And the people that are most critical, I think, and the most potential to touch are those people that are racist that don't know they are racist. And those people are the people that can easily be turned off, but with an open, welcoming attitude, may be able to change their minds, may be able to change their behavior. So I see our site today not just as a place for memorialization and a place of conscience, but I also see it as a place where the transformation of conscience can occur. And I think that's something that I have to remember going forward every single day.
That's awesome, Sean. Thank you. And one of the things that I love about what Sean's saying there, and what I've heard from other people, is that we find sites, particularly in moments of challenge, that it's about trying to work as close to the center of your values as possible. Often means you have to work at the edges of your skill sets. And you push into uncomfortable and challenging places with what you know and what you can do and what your policies are and what your systems are. And that's actually the place that sites are most flourishing, is when you're at the edge of your skills, but the center of your values. And so we encourage you to think about trying to work in those places. And I hope that, so as we wrap today, thank you for giving us a couple minutes extra of your time here. A couple things I hope that you take with this. One, most importantly, I hope you found some new people to think this through with and be on a journey with, right? Because again, it's relationships that keep us challenging and working at this stuff throughout. I also hope that you're hearing, as people are coming at this from a bunch of perspectives, that special events like weddings or anything else don't stand apart from the challenges and the impacts of our site as a whole, right? And so as we are examining who we are in this larger world and who we want to be in relation to people outside of the organization and inside of it, that these don't sit separately. All those same tools and questions and ideas need to be applied to these. And the last, particularly in light of the moment where we are, right, that, as Sean's saying, compassion and welcome are critical tools of building the beloved community. Elon, thank you. But that, right, that as we think about all of our policies, every policy, not just the ones about employment or something else, right, we want to think about them with anti-racist lens. And that if we don't, even when we have the best of intentions, if we aren't examining them, if we aren't thinking about them, like Sean was saying, hey, we charge, right? And that becomes, maybe unintentionally, maybe intentionally at times, right? It becomes a racist policy because of the disproportionate impacts that it has on people, right? And so that we want to take these lenses throughout all of our work, and with that love and with that compassion and with that care, look at all of our policies those ways and think about how we can build versions that heal all the different kinds of harms and damages and wounds that you all have talked about today. So Ashley has put a link in the chat of a survey. We are learning all the time ourselves, trying to figure out how best to make sure that the information and relationships that you need are moving around the world. So that's, fill that out, it helps us. A couple other webinars that we have coming up. A couple of our transitional justice team are gonna be talking about activism and advocacy. On the 17th, we're gonna be talking about transitional justice and atrocity prevention on the 18th. We've got another webinar short in there before that I have to come up with for next week. I think we're gonna look at multiple definitions of justice. That's the most likely thing that we're gonna do right now, but stay tuned. We're writing these fast. Be in touch with us. We hope you continue the conversation with us, with anybody else. If you wanna be in touch with people, throw your email in the chat box. If you missed somebody and you wanna be in touch with them, reach out to us. And we hope that you will work with us many times in the future. You'll be part of the conversation, and that you're staying safe and are lifting up voices around the world right now. So thank you for spending time, and we look forward to seeing you all many more times soon.